Okay, seeing how, are there any other announcements? If not, I'm going to ask Vic to introduce Dave Grosser to us, and then we'll ask Dave to enlighten us. Thank you. Vic, you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Am I okay now? Okay, thanks, Tom. And thanks for steering us through that glitch a week ago and getting us set to get going again this week. I'd like to say just a couple words in my introduction about CISPUS. Because my history goes back to 1 month after I retired in 1998, when I found myself in El Salvador with CISPUS. And so since that time, I just wanted to thank CISPUS for keeping me and keeping all of us informed about what's going on in El Salvador. And certainly I learned a lot during that time period about the past and the influence of the United States, influence and weaponry of the United States over El Salvador. When we did decide to do this current meeting, this November meeting about El Salvador, everybody in the group said, okay, we should have CISPUS. And happily, when I called Alexis and asked if she would help us with CISPUS, she was very enthusiastic and responded by saying, yes, that's great, we'll help you, we'll participate, but we don't know exactly how. But now we know how. We have Dave. And Alexis gave us Dave, and we're happy to have him here. And he has deep experience in El Salvador and has been an activist in Latin America since the 1980s. And so he has a lot of background to share with us. Beyond that, I think I would simply like to say that thank you very much, Dave, and turn it over to Dave Grosser. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks both to Rockla and to the Peace Center in Buffalo for putting this together and inviting me to speak with you. CISPUS is a grassroots organization, so we need to have contact with people at the grassroots, like you all. Just a couple of other things to introduce CISPUS to you. CISPUS stands for Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. In case that somebody doesn't know that, we were founded in 1980, which is the same year that the Salvadoran Civil War began. And so we're over 40 years old. And we, for those of you who were active back then, you sure are aware that the movement was quite varied and broad. So CISPUS was an important part of the solidarity movement in the 1980s, but certainly not the whole of it. And that's important because we have a particular perspective and a particular set of principles that I think distinguish us from a lot of solidarity groups, both back then and now. And the most important thing that distinguishes us is that since our founding, we had publicly been in solidarity, not just with the broad array of popular organizations in El Salvador, the unions, campesino groups, student groups, et cetera, that they call the popular movement or the social movement, but we've been in solidarity with the FMLN when it was a guerrilla army, after the peace accords when it became a political party, and through to today. So that's something that I think distinguishes us from a lot of groups, and something that We can talk more about if you're interested in why we made that decision. It's something that I'm quite proud of for CISPAS. And as I mentioned, I think another thing that distinguishes CISPAS a little bit is a grassroots organizing model. We're a national organization. We have local chapters in, at this point, not a huge number of cities, maybe 10. You know, quite a smaller number than back in the 80s. And we feel our power or our organizing goes on at the grassroots level through chapters and affiliates like you all. So I'm going to put a form to maintain contact in the chat. I hope you all will fill it out so that there's a way you can signify what kind of contact you want. And there's a couple of things that you all as organizations can do over the next few months that I'll talk about at the end of the talk. And those are on that form as well. So that's going in the chat now, I hope. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what are we going to talk? What am I going to talk about? I'm going to mainly talk about the current situation and a little bit of background to the current situation. I'm going to make a very quick march through Salvadoran history since the 1960s. Very quick. If you have questions, you know, we could maybe get into them later. I don't know how you usually handle questions in these talks, but if you want to put them in the chat or I don't know. Anyway, it's up to you all.
Yeah, they can, you can put your questions in the chat. I'll watch for that. And we also, Dave, at the end of your talk, we'll have a open period for questions and answers.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay. So let's start with a brief historical review. I've got a slide for this. If we can put it up on the screen. Whoever is the convener of this call.
You should be able to share it now, David.
Okay, now you're putting all the pressure on me. Let's see. Share screen, how about that? Share. Let's get rid of that. And whoops. Sorry about this, everyone. Why is this not cooperating? Okay, here we go. I think there's a way I can make that bigger, but can you all see it? Yeah?
Yes.
No? Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay, so brief history of El Salvador. So in 1930, so the Salvadoran government has been, up until the 1980s, almost a continual succession of military governments allied very closely with the wealthy in El Salvador, who up until recently have based their wealth in coffee. That's not really the case anymore. And in 1932, in the midst of the worst of the Depression, coffee growers who were largely of indigenous backgrounds had a revolt in the western part of the country. It was put down with tremendous violence by the government. A historian who investigated it estimated that 30,000 people were killed in a month. And a lot of the Salvadoran left was decimated in that repression as well. That's referred to as La Matanza, which means the massacre. So very slowly from there, the Salvadoran left rebuilt itself. And it really picked up steam in the 1970s. when there was a lot of labor organizing. There was a lot of organizing by campesinos, by peasants, and there were two coalitions that ran for the presidency, and both times they probably won the election, but it was stolen by fraud. So the fraud and the repression convinced an increasing number of Salvadorans that there was no peaceful road to changing the society, and that armed struggle was the only way that they could win any real changes in the system. So in 1980, a number of armed groups came together to form the FMLN, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, and the war began in earnest. And that's when the Solidarity Movement in the United States also began in earnest in response to the things that the United States was doing to support the Salvadoran government, and to the news about the unbelievable repression and bestiality of the Salvadoran elite. One anecdote about that: the main right-wing party, Arena, or what used to be the main right-wing party, the party that was formed by the organizers of the death squads like Roberto Dalvison. Every electoral period, they start their campaign. They have a big rally in a community was in the center of where the repression for La Matanza took place. So they rub it in the face of everyone that, yes, we killed all those people and we'll do it again. So that's somewhat what the Salvadoran left has been up against. And I think the Salvadoran left has been tough, resourceful, and courageous in response. That's one of the reasons why, one of the things that drew me to CISPAS and to El Salvador. Anyway, the war went on for 12 years. It was essentially a stalemate. The FMLN concluded that they could not win a military victory, and that prolonging the war just increased the suffering of the people. So they pushed to have a negotiated settlement of the war, which occurred in 1992. There was a peace accord signed. And since the war was a stalemate, a draw, if you want to put it that way, the left did not get everything it wanted, but it won a set of pretty significant victories, which ended the dictatorship, perhaps until now. The FMLN became a functioning political party. They competed in elections, and as we'll see very shortly, they even won the presidency for a period of time. The repression became vastly diminished, although it never disappeared completely. And the kind of freedoms that we associate with a representative democratic system, like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, elections where the winner actually gets to take office and the loser leaves office, became the norm in El Salvador from 1992 until now. But what the left did not win was significant changes in control over the wealth of the country or the economy. That stayed in the hands of the right. And that set the stage for the next phase from 1992 to 2009, when the Arena Party had the presidency and carried out a broad series of neoliberal reforms of the kind that I'm sure everybody is familiar with: privatization of government services, union busting, cutting whatever aid to the poor the government had in place, etc. And this was undergirded by a corruptions of the political system, and also by support from the US, particularly when the Republicans had the presidency, which they did for a significant period of that time. The FMLN, however, was able to unite with the various popular organizations and resist some of these neoliberal measures quite successfully sometimes. Most significantly, around the year 2000, the government wanted to privatize the healthcare system, and the workers in the healthcare system, both the doctors and the support staff organized in unions, went on strike. The strike had massive support on the part of the population. They were able to mount marches of more than 100,000 people in support of the strike, and the government backed down. And that helped the FMLN move into first place sort of in the electoral system. So at that point, they never had a majority of seats in the legislature, but they had a plurality. They had more seats than Arena, but not more seats than the right wing as a whole. Anyway, so in 2009, they were able to win the presidency, and they held the presidency for 10 years. And they instituted, or tried to institute, a lot of programs which benefited the population as a whole very much, but they were ultimately frustrated by the right in doing enough to not create a situation where there was a backlash against them by the voters, and that set the stage for Nayib Bukele to win the presidency in 2019. So that's where we sort of pick up our story more in detail. Who is Nayib Bukele? He is a young, handsome, social media savvy businessman. He comes from one of the wealthiest families in the country, but a family that was oriented towards the left. And originally, he won political office as a member of the FMLN. He was elected first mayor of a small town outside the capital, and then he moved on to the mayoralty of the capital, San Salvador. And then he was expecting to be nominated by the FMLN for president, or hoping for it. And when that did not happen, he came into increasing conflict with the leadership of the FMLN, and was expelled from the party for violations of the party rules. And he formed eventually a new party called Nuevas Ideas, New Ideas. And on the basis of that, he won the presidency in 2019. And then in the subsequent legislative election, the year is escaping me, but must have been 2020, his party and allied parties won an absolute majority, a veto-proof majority, not that he was going to veto anything. So that essentially he's in a position now where anything his party wants to pass in the legislature will pass. So he has been extremely popular among Salvadoran voters. And conversely, the prestige and the votes of both the FMLN on the left and Arena on the hard right have declined. So right now, neither of them are in a position where they can really, through the legislative system, block what Bukele wants to do. And there is a very strong sense on the part of the left that he is dangerous because he's an authoritarian who, like Trump or Bolsonaro or some of the other, what are referred to as populists by the US news media. He is wants to rig the electoral system so that he can control the government and run for the presidency multiple times, which at this point is not allowed under the Salvadoran Constitution. He is like Trump in many other ways. He governs by Twitter. He addresses the population through social media. He personalizes everything. He has appointed members of his family and and close business associates to all kinds of positions of authority and power in the government. He takes everything personally, and he craves public adulation. So there are a lot of parallels to Trump in his personality. I think politically he's not as reactionary as Trump. He is an authoritarian, but he doesn't have a sort of traditional business oriented platform. In fact, he doesn't have much of a platform at all. His personal popularity kind of catapulted him into the presidency. His attacks on the old ways that the other parties did it, his promises about reducing the extremely high crime rate, captured the imagination of the Salvadoran population enough so that he was able to win quite striking electoral victories up until this point. So on the left, he's seen as a real threat. They refer to him as having fascist tendencies, that he wants to create an authoritarian government. And he has shown this in numerous ways. For one thing, he's refused to follow the law. So for example, while the issue of trying to change the Constitution so that he can run for election again is a pretty shady thing, although there might be a way that it could be done legally as opposed to just, we control the branches of the government, so we're just going to do it. He has fired thousands, I think, of government workers illegally. He's replaced judges who he does not agree with, even though they were set. They have a set term to fill out, and he removed them before they finished their term. He is very pro-military and is pushing a lot to rehabilitate the military and insert them into national life in ways that the peace accords expressly forbade. That was, I should have said, another important reform that the peace accords brought in, to shrink the size of the army and to place restrictions, essentially forbid the army from participating in the internal political life of the country, which of course it did before the Civil War constantly. And Bukele is trying to roll that back. So there was an incident about a year ago, not quite a year ago, last February, where he brought armed troops into the legislative chamber when they were debating an international loan that he wanted, and there was enough opposition, I think, to stop it. And it was clearly just an attempt to intimidate voters, the legislators, and that had never been done before. It had never been done, even in the Civil War, even by Arena or by the military governments. He wants to double the size of the army, and he made the army kind of the basis for his COVID plan. The laws and programs that were supposed to help the country cope with COVID were administered by the army, carried out by the army. So, you know, everybody in El Salvador has family members who were killed in the war, killed by the army, or knows someone who was killed by the army. This is a threat that people are deathly concerned about, really concerned about. So very serious. In addition, he has imprisoned 10 leaders of the FMLN on various corruption charges, trumped up charges, I think, although we'll have to wait and see. And sorry, they worry that that's just the prelude to wholesale repression of the organization. In economic policy, his economic policy is marked by vagueness, ineptness, corruption, and most recently, the introduction of Bitcoin as a national currency, and that's important. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So Bukele, so we have a situation in El Salvador where a new political actor who does not really fit in a lot of ways to the traditional right-left spectrum is now in charge and trying to project himself as completely changing the rules of the game and bringing in something completely new and going to lead El Salvador into the 21st century. And the traditional political parties are grasping for some way to try to respond, to rebuild their positions and to win back the support of the population. So at this point, the FMLN has 4 seats in the legislature. And I think at their height, they had about 28. Sorry, so that'll give you a sense of how dire things are in some ways. So obviously, El Salvador, the opinion or the position of the US is very important in El Salvador as well. And Bukele has evoked an interesting response from the US political establishment. It's interesting because they are almost universally negative. Across the political spectrum in the United States, everyone dislikes Bukele, and for different reasons, perhaps, but everybody does. The US traditionally has wanted to build up the center in El Salvador. El Salvador's political system is somewhat unique compared to a lot in that, at least before the Bukele phenomenon, the strength in the Salvadoran political system was at the ends. It was like I don't know, a set of barbells. The right was strong with the Arena Party. The left was strong with the FMLN. The center was virtually non-existent. The US has wanted the center, build something in the center, a party that can draw strength away from the FMLN. And perhaps initially they thought Bukele would be that, but I think they're very disappointed in him and very angry at him because he's too erratic and he won't play ball with them. So the US I think has no problem with his economic policies. He's been open to the kind of neoliberal policies that the US has been promoting in Central America, but they're very disappointed at the kind of rhetorical attacks that he makes on the US. He denounces US imperialism when the U.S. makes comments, the U.S. government bodies make comments about the repression there, et cetera. And he says they, I think, do not consider him to be reliable enough, and they would like to be rid of him. And as a result, at least on a rhetorical level, on a press release level, on a speech making level, the Biden administration is very expresses a lot of concern about Bukele. On the level that really matters, they continue to send police and military aid at increasing amounts. And in that sense, I think the policies of the Biden administration are driven a lot by the way that the U.S. Population perceives the level of migration and the seriousness of migration from Central America, and so that there's currently a plan called, what is it called? It used to be called the Alliance for Prosperity. It was first brought in under Obama, and the purpose of it, as stated by the Biden administration, is going to get at the root causes of migration and make it possible, make social change in not just in El Salvador, but in Honduras and Guatemala, so that people will not have to leave, so they can have a decent life at home. And so there's some economic projects, although they're mainly big projects like electrical generation, dam projects, or mining projects, things like that, things that don't particularly benefit the population, at least not the poor, but make the country infrastructure more suited to the kind of large-scale economic projects that the U.S. likes to promote. There's as I said, a significant increase in police and military aid, and this is for all three countries, and a much smaller amount of aid for education, which is, I would say, the only piece of the package that actually could possibly benefit the population. So this, I think, regardless of the rhetoric, this at this point has sent a message to Bukele that, the disapproval is cosmetic. But at the same time, it creates an opportunity for us here in the United States to reach out more broadly about the issues of what does the U.S. aid to Central America actually result in? What does it do for Central America? And we have noticed an increasing willingness in Congress to talk about the kinds of things that we think are the way to support El Salvador, and restrict the damage that Bukele is doing. And I'll say a little bit more about that when I wrap up, which I guess I should do quite quickly. So let me just say a few more things about the Salvadoran left and what's their response to Bukele. Well, they initially were, as I said, quite disoriented, didn't understand why their old ways of framing the issues, which the left did around, workers' rights, class struggle, benefiting the population from below economically, why that didn't resonate with people. And they were intimidated by Bukele's popularity. They were intimidated by Bukele's belligerence, and they were intimidated by violence, which has not reached the levels anywhere near of before the war, during the war. But there have been cases where at least a couple of FMLN members have been murdered by government functionaries. And I think that, again, in a country where everybody has suffered from that kind of violence, it has an important effect. But I think, I hope, and we may be at a turning point. The Bitcoin decision is exceedingly unpopular with people in El Salvador and has galvanized a lot of opposition. And the opposition is very broad-based, so that they finally have been able to mount some significant protest demonstrations. And these are demonstrations that are broad, called by very broad fronts, which include not just the FMLN, but also many important institutions in the country, like the National University, like the Catholic Church, and the right wing as well. So they have protest marches and they say nobody should wear their party colors. You know, everybody should wear the national colors, and that has brought out marches of over 10,000 people a couple of times, and that's the first time that's happened in quite a while in El Salvador. So does that mark a significant turning point? It's kind of too early to say. I think the left is much more optimistic than they were a few months ago. I think they see that Bitcoin and defense of democratic institutions do resonate with a quite significant section of the population, and they are hoping that they can inject into that broad kind of united front that's built around issues of defense of democracy and responsible economic policy and opposition to corruption, that they will be the only ones who will inject issues like opposition to privatization of water, which is an important issue that Bukele is championing. And that through when the charm of Bukele wears thin and people ask the question, well, what really concretely has he done for us, the poor majority, that the historic base of the FMLN will be ready to once again get behind them in demanding things like, increase in the minimum wage, and the same kind of things a lot of the same kind of things I think that the Bernie campaign mobilized around here, although they do have national health care. So our role here in the United States, I think, is twofold. The first off is to do what we can to limit Bukele's ability to repress the population through the kind of human rights response actions that all of you, if you were around in the 80s, no doubt participated in. I think those are necessary again, and CISPAS chapters locally in some parts of the country have had pickets at Salvadoran consulates to protest the things like the arrests of the 10 FMLN members. In addition, we in CISPAS feel like it's now really important, and we have real openings to actually make cuts in the aid that the US is sending to the police and the military in Central America. And we were able to make some small cuts in the last budget that the Congress wrote up. And we want to intensify that campaign in the next Congress or in the coming year, both by building more broadly out among groups that are concerned with Central America and Latin America, and unifying around a common set of demands and a common program. And also, and I think this is a much more hopeful and exciting thing, in bringing a whole generation of young Salvadoran Americans into the solidarity movement. We have had quite a bit of success in transforming CISPAS from an organization made up of old white people like me who've been around since the 80s into an organization that is got significant membership and leadership among second generation Salvadorans who are in their 20s, and that I think bodes well for the future. So there's a couple of actual things that I'd like to pitch to you all for our upcoming actions, but I guess maybe we should pause there and start the questions.
Dave, we had a question from Terry, and he was asking, let me find it, about, whoops, the role of the church, if the Catholic Church and can't get it to come, oh, here it is. Do the Catholic and evangelical churches still have powerful, are they powerful politically? And the second question was, doesn't military buildup raise threats of a staged coup?
Yeah, the churches, I think, do have quite a lot of power in El Salvador. You know, like most places in Latin America, evangelical churches have grown pretty dramatically over the past, I don't know, 20 or 30 or 40, 40 years, and have eaten into the power of the Catholic Church. But the Catholic Church is still quite an important force as well. One example, one of the biggest achievements, I think, of the FMLN presidencies was that they were able to get a law through the legislature to outlaw metallic mining, which is essentially strip mining in El Salvador, strip mining for gold. And El Salvador is the only country in the world that has banned these kinds of mining processes. So that was a great victory. And this was a law that the FMLN had introduced into the legislature many, many times, and it went nowhere because, as I said, they never had a majority of the seats in the legislature, even when they had the presidency. But there was a persistent and strong grassroots movement among the people in the communities that were sort of slated to be the center of mining. And there is an environmental movement that was allied with them. And it's pretty clear that the crucial thing that finally made the passage of this law possible was when the Archbishop came out very strongly in favor of it. And that was enough to sort of tip the balance. On the question of building up the military, does it make a coup more possible? I think everybody is scared to death of that. So I would say yes.
And Dave, what about Bukele's measurements as far as firing all of these judges and everything? The El Mazote massacre case was starting to move forward, and he's put a stop to it really by getting rid of all the constitutional judges and everything in El Salvador that were hearing that case. Is there anything that you can talk to us about that?
Well, one of Bukele's things is his rejection of the old politics extends to the peace accords. He's called the peace accords rubbish. And he, he doesn't, so yeah, you're right. He has sabotaged the investigation of El Mazote and closed offices that were charged with, investigating and preserving the historical memory of the war period, and trying to get at who was exactly responsible for all the crimes that were committed then. And I think while he is president, it would be very difficult for anything like that to move forward. The grassroots is trying to preserve what they call the historical memory. It's one of the main points of unity of the broad coalition that the left has to try to oppose Bukele. And some of the, there are some sort of smaller organizations that have that as a really important part of their program. So I don't know if you all are familiar with the community called Arquetao in northern central El Salvador, in the department of Chalatenango. It's right on the Honduran border, and it was a site of a lot of massacres during the war years. It's a very left allied community, and they have a historical memory commission, which is trying to collect testimonies and evidence and stuff about things that happened in their area. There's a museum in San Salvador, the Museum of the Word. I can't remember the exact name, and it's directed by someone who was worked on the FMLN's clandestine radio stations during the war, and they also are trying to preserve the memory of the war years. But it's going to be difficult while Bukele is in power.
Thank you. Kathy wondered, how has climate change affected El Salvador, Dave?
Well, all of Central America is in a pretty severe drought and has been for several years. So I think climate change is probably somewhere at the root of that. And I don't know that, I'm not a climate scientist, so I can't predict what'll happen. And even if I was a climate scientist, I probably shouldn't predict what would happen. But I think it's one of the factors that is pushing people off the land and forcing, people essentially face three choices, or a choice of three possibilities when they lose the capacity to farm. One is to sort of get involved in the marginal, economy as a street vendor or something like that. A second is to get into crime, and a third is to come to the U.S. And I think a lot of that is the result of climate change. As I mentioned, there is a Salvadoran environmental movement, and one of its main goals right now is to get what they call a comprehensive water law through the legislature. So this is something that the left has been proposing now for a number of years. It would establish that the access to clean water at a reasonable price is a right of every resident of the country. So that by no means could be realized, in the short term, but it would at the very least, allow organizers to say, you can't take the water in this community because of the right to water through the water law. So the right has, on the other hand, been trying for years to privatize the water system. I think it's testimony to, even outside government, even as weak as they are in some ways, the strength of the social movement, that they have been able to block this. They've been able to, I think, make a lot of the leaders of the right concerned that it could really blow up in their face with the pop, not just, not just keep bringing out the usual suspects, but that the mass of the population would turn out in support of, in opposition to the privatization of water, the way they did around the issue of the privatization of healthcare around the around 2000. So, the FMLN had some projects to use to try to develop geothermal power, try to develop solar power. Obviously, the volcanoes and the position on the equator make El Salvador a great site for that kind of thing. But like everything they tried to do, it was starved for funds and had very little impact. Sad to say, but that's the case for a lot of the projects they tried to put into place.
Peggy's wondering, Dave, can you tell us exactly why people are leaving El Salvador to migrate to the US?
Why they choose to come to the US, I am not completely sure, although at this point, there are something like 2 million Salvadorans living in the United States. And that is about a quarter of the population. So, if you're going to leave and move to another country, it's so much easier to move someplace where you at least know a few people who understand you and who you share a culture with and all of that. So, but I think the neoliberal reorientation, they always call them neoliberal reforms. That's really the wrong word. Whatever you want to call it, the reconfiguration of the economy under neoliberalism did a number of things that made it extremely difficult for ordinary people to make a living. It wiped out all things that the government did to try to provide, subsidies that made it easier for the poor to make a living. It starved agriculture of credit so that it was difficult for farmers to make it in the market. They cut budgets down to the bone, so there were very few. Again, there was no money for programs that benefited people, and they created a very nice situation for the economic oligarchy and the right. That is, as Salvadorans moved, particularly to the United States, they sent money home to their families, remittances, as it's called. And that has grown to be a really significant percentage of the gross national product of the country. So if you are a right-wing politician, if you are Nayib Bukele, you don't need to do anything to create jobs, because poor people are leaving, they're sending money back. That money is what their families use for economic survival. That stimulates demand for consumer products, at least somewhat. And you don't need government programs. You don't need industries don't need to create jobs for blue collar workers, and your economy will kind of will remain intact based on that. And so You can keep taxes low because you don't have to, again, you don't have to fund a lot of government programs, and poor people rely on money they get from relatives in the US. So I guess that was a lot of stuff, but it all relates to immigration one way or another.
Well, Granny would like to know about Bukele. And you said he's not a left or right ideologue. Has made his journey from the FMLN to his current power. Is he like Trump, do you think, mainly interested in the power? And if so, what do you think would stop him from staying in power?
I think he is basically a right winger. That is, all of his policies are consistent with what the economic elite wants. But that's in that way, he's the same as Trump. Trump's big achievement was giving the rich a tax cut. That's about all he was able to accomplish. And like Trump, I think he kind of appeals to the population by using, various kinds of populist type rhetoric to try to create the sense that he's not a traditional politician. I don't know what his motivations are, except I think like Trump, he from what I can see, has a tremendous ego. He wants to be the center of everything. He takes everything personally. He demands kind of unswerving loyalty from people, etc. And if he doesn't get it, he dumps them. So if he's smart enough, skillful enough, if things work out for him, maybe he can, maintain enough popularity to stay in power for a period of time, or make enough, changes to electoral laws and things to allow him to sustain himself through elections, which are sort of democratic in form but not in content. We'll have to see about all that. On the other hand, he could be like the Wizard of Oz. That is, people could look behind the curtain and they could see that there's nothing there. And the Bitcoin fiasco, I think, has really put a significant, chipped away in a significant way at the kind of public acclaim that he had been basking in. And he, again, it's very early to say, he has behaved very erratically over these kinds of things. First they said they would roll out Bitcoin in this very ambitious way, and then people started saying, well, this doesn't seem like such a good idea. So they backtracked on it in a lot of ways. He has, his party in the legislature proposed a bill which essentially would outlaw protests under the guise of outlawing large public gatherings because of COVID. And there was a significant amount of public opposition. So Bukele essentially vetoed it. He pocket vetoed a law that was passed by the members of his own party in the legislature. And then he denounced them. He said they were incompetent because they didn't get him the law in time for him to be able to pass it. So he threw his own party members under the bus. And when these demonstrations occurred earlier this month which were nationwide mobilizations. I mean, El Salvador is the size of Massachusetts. So getting to the capital to attend a demonstration is not the same thing as driving from Buffalo to Washington, D.C., but his response was to say, well, nobody actually showed up. They were very small, and to use doctored photographs to try to prove that. Secondly, to say that everybody who was participating in the demonstrations was sort of a tool of the United States, that the United States was funding these demonstrations. So these weren't real Salvadorans, and this was, outside agitators and that kind of thing. So all of that's very Trumpian. And how long he can keep it up, I think has to do with how good he is at this thing. But I don't imagine it can happen forever.
Okay, thank you. And then Terry's wondering if you think Biden administration could be encouraged to push for those alternative energy projects that you mentioned.
I don't know if those projects still exist, and I could try and find out and get back to you all about it. But what we've been able to do on the economic front is there was an amendment proposed to the State Department budget, which called for the review of projects in Central America, and said that the US should fund no projects which cause significant environmental damage or violate the land rights of indigenous people or small farmers. So on the one hand, that's not worth the paper it's written on. And those of you who were around in the 80s might have participated in these farcical certifications by the State Department that the human rights situation was improving in El Salvador. It happened every year. So this is kind of akin to that, except it provides an opening now for us to say, well, what about this project? The people oppose it. This and this engineer and scientist have said it's going to cause significant environmental damage. Why are we funding it? And I think it depends on us. If we can mount a significant enough pressure campaign, we can stop some of these things, and maybe also get behind some things too. But definitely stop some of these projects. We had a pretty significant victory in Honduras fairly recently. There's an electric dam, a dam to generate electricity in a part of Honduras called Hilamito, where the population is mobilized to try and stop it. And the various Honduras solidarity organizations, Witness for Peace, Honduras Solidarity Network, have been supporting them. And the State Department actually withdrew funding for it. It's still being funded by some private corporations in the United States, but the State Department withdrew funding. I mean, the good thing about having Democrats, this is me speaking, this is not CISPA's official position. I want to make that clear. The good thing about having Democrats in office is not that on their own they'll do anything. I think the Democrats are a corporate party just like the Republicans. Again, that's my personal opinion. But regardless of what their motivations are, their political persona is that they support issues that are of benefit ordinary people, working people, etc. And to the extent that we can hold them to that, we can force them to do some things. So that's our strategy in relation to Congress. and this is a good time to pressure them because, again, the whole of the Washington establishment is unhappy with Bukele. And that just provides some openings to push some of these issues. But outside of a very few kind of, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, members of Congress, almost all of them will need to be pushed. And the people that do the pushing are people like you at the grassroots.
So Dave, the last time I was in El Salvador was about 10 years ago. And I was astonished and perplexed by the fact that they're on a US dollar system. And
Yep.
while maybe a worker here is making $15 an hour or $20 an hour, that's all that a person who was working a 24-hour shift was making for that whole entire shift, was like $10 to $20 maybe. And yet, say a product that I could buy here for $80 in the country, in El Salvador, that very same product would be like $180. And so a lot of people would staying alive by using credit, buying things on credit, and the credit rates were like 40%. Is that kind of disparity still exist? I mean, is it, how do people live? I never could understand that. How I thought El Salvador might be being used as an experiment by the US government to see how high can corporations drive their prices and how low can they drive the wages and still make as much money. That was that's the only thing I could think of. Have you got any takes on that?
Well, again, I think the role of remittances is key. So, every Salvadoran I know in the United States sends money home. And that is what provides the difference between survival and ruin for lots of families. And I'm not an expert on the Salvadoran economy. So the relative prices of things, I haven't been there since 2014. I probably shouldn't pretend that I really have precise knowledge of some of these things, but I just think that the economic elite knows that no matter how bad unemployment is, no matter how poorly trained workers are, because the schools are no good, et cetera, there will still be purchasing power in the economy because of the money that Salvadorans send home. And Salvadorans often say, well, we used to export coffee, now we export people.
Okay, I think I've got another message here. Let's see. I don't know what that means. So anyways, are there any other questions for Dave? If you have a question, either just unmute yourself and jump in or raise your hand and I'll unmute you from here.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jim.
On the $4 billion that Biden wants spent, is anyone tracking how much has been spent and what it's being used for? Anything about these 12 companies that Harris brought down there in the summer?
Could everybody hear that?
I unmuted myself. Should I say it again? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was a little hard to hear you, Jim.
On the $4 billion that Biden wants to spend on the Northern Triangle, is anyone tracking how much has been spent and what it's being spent on? And these 12 companies that Harris brought down during the summer to the Northern Triangle? Do you know anything about what they're doing?
Getting that kind of information is pretty difficult, and we're not really the best organization to be doing that because, most of our staff are activists, and not economists or political scientists or engineers or whatever. I think that groups like WOLA, the Washington Office in Latin America, or LOG, Latin America Working Group, or NACLA, who published the North American Congress on Latin America, they would be much more likely to have that kind of knowledge. And when we when we cultivate relations with congressional offices, we try to get them to, to track down some of this information for us, but I don't really have any of it at my fingertips, so I can't be much help on that.
'Cause
Okay.
you
Yep.
did mention about a lot of the money going toward military and police spending. Do you have any more to say about that? Like how current that is? How much money now is being spent by the Biden administration on militarization of the border, their borders?
Well, I don't. So one of the chosen tactics of Biden, and before Biden, Obama, is to avoid the kind of scenes that we had when the Border Patrol agents on horseback were chasing those Haitian refugees around. That doesn't look good at all. They would like to prevent as many migrants as possible from even getting to the US border. So they have put not only funds in terms of aid for immigration control and police, but also political pressure on Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to do what they can to restrain people so they can't get to the US border. And that's a major immigration control kind of tactic that the Biden administration is using, and that, as I said, the Obama administration used before them. I don't think that's the major focus of US military and police aid to the region. I think that goes to the drug war. And one of the things that we are trying to kind of get an understanding with other organizations like School of the Americas Watch, SOA Watch, is whether we can broadly form some kind of coalition that could effectively, contest the money that goes to the drug war, because that's an enormous amount of money. And it not only goes, it goes to all kinds of things. And I don't know what most of the things are, except I do know that a lot of this aid is not for guns. It's for computers and surveillance equipment and, databases so they can track people and all that kind of stuff, which of course is very useful in all kinds of, in political repression as well, and a big concern of people down there. So.
Okay, well, thank you. If there aren't any more questions at this point,
Well, let me do my pitch.
I'm going to ask Steve to do his pitch.
Okay, so I put this Google form in the chat. I hope you'll all fill it out. It gives you some choices about how you would like to hear from us. One of them is just get on our email list, get updates. We send out a monthly news update about what's going on in El Salvador, get alerts when there, something serious happens and we need a response, and hear about, campaigns we have to pressure Congress to do X or to raise money for, for the organizations down in El Salvador, which we do. So that's one thing. The second thing is we have alerts about asking Congress to cut funds. They're still current, and anybody who wants, we can send you a link to that if you fill out the asking my Congress person to cut military aid box. The third one goes to you more as members of your two organizations. We will have a day of action on January 16th, which is the anniversary of the signing of the peace accords. And these actions will be in support of the peace accords and protesting the ways that Bukele is trying to erode and turn around the provisions of the peace accords, and saying that, we support the intention of the peace accords, and we think, we want him to honor those and not back out of them. And the last choice, which is looking forward, we hope, to when the pandemic conditions ease up a bit and we can have delegations again. We before the pandemic, we sent at least one delegation to El Salvador every year, and you all would be more than welcome to join if you are interested, either as individuals or as representatives of RACLA and the Peace Committee, or however you'd like to do it. So I hope you'll all check something off and fill it out, and that we can, maintain contact moving forward.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dave, and thanks again for your patience and for being here tonight. We really appreciate your knowledge and your depth of experience with that country and the people in it, because they're all beautiful people down there. I have to say that because my son-in-law is one, and I'd be in trouble if I didn't mention that. I love El Salvador, and we really appreciate the things that CISPIS is doing there, and keep up the work. Keep up the work, because it's so important. It really is.
Yeah, well, we will, and we hope that there are ways that, we can keep up the work together.
Perfect. I'd like to also just thank everybody for joining us tonight for this presentation, and thank you for your patience. And just to mention again that if you haven't joined us yet as a member, we would encourage you to do so. We'd love to have you, but we just like having you at these meetings in particular. But go to the racla.org website and you're going to see the really nice newsletter. I say it's a prize award-winning newsletter that Grania puts together with Marianne. And you can find information about membership there. But again, thank you all very much for being here, and especially you, Dave, and for the work you and your organization are doing. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thank you,
Thank
Dave,
you.
for a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Sure, my
And
pleasure.
Dick, thank you for getting it set up.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Dave. Maybe I'll see you in Boston sometime.
Yeah, well, you've got my email, so
I do. Sounds good. Maybe we can get together.
we have a great bar in the neighborhood for pizza and beer.
What? There's pubs in Boston?
A few.
Good night, everybody.
Buenas
Good night,
noches.
everybody. Thanks again.
Bye all.
Bye now.